Welcome to your first video for Introductory Algebra. You should have your media lesson packet printed and ready and in front of you, some pencils, erasers, a calculator, and a highlighter. Make sure you write down or highlight anything that I write down or highlight, and in addition, if there's anything I say that you want to remember for later, make sure you write that down as well. So you're creating a resource for yourself to help you prepare for the midterms and the finals. You'll want all of these notes. They're like notes you would take in class. And also it helps you learn better if you interact by writing things down as you go. It helps you process information. So let's get started. In this first video, we're going to identify types of variables in context. So there's two ways we're going to think about variables. And you'll see all of this information is in your packet. So you should read this information before you start a video. We say a variable is a letter that represents a placeholder for a specific value. This value will remain unchanged based on the confines of the mathematical statement. So an example is the number of texts you sent yesterday. So that represents a specific value. Okay? We may or may not know this value, but we can still define it as a variable. Another way we can think of a variable is a letter that represents a quantity that might change. And this may seem more intuitive because the word variable, you can see vary in there, and something that varies changes. And this is just another way that we can think about variable. So an example is the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit outside your home yesterday. So this value would change throughout the day as the temperature changes. So we could define a variable that represents the temperature outside your home, and there may be many answers that depends on what time of day it is. It could also depend on other things such as where you take the temperature, in the sun or in the shade, etc. So let's work on some examples. So determine whether the following variables are placeholders or changing quantities. If it is a placeholder, give an example of a value of the variable that may make sense. And if it's a changing value, give an example of what the change may depend on, and also list 3 examples of values that may make sense. So looking at the first one, we have the area in square inches of the surface of a large pizza that you had delivered. So we want to determine whether this is a placeholder or a changing value. So what you need to think of is this specific? Is there one fixed answer for this, or does it depend on, or can you think of things that it might depend on? Okay. So since you had the pizza delivered, this is one specific pizza, and this specific pizza will have an area. So if it just said the area in square inches of a large pizza, that could depend on where you ordered the pizza from. They could have different sizes, and even the same place, it might be a little bit different. But since we're looking at one specific pizza, this has a value. So it is a specific value that we don't know. So it's a placeholder. So now we want to give an example of a value for the variable that may make sense. Okay. So since we're talking about area, I'll use a formula that you may or may not remember, that the area of a circle, so a pizza, most of them are circular, and if we look at the surface area, it is pi times the radius squared. So I'm thinking of my experience ordering large pizzas, and they usually tell you what the diameter is, the distance across. I'm going to say a large might have a 16-inch diameter. So a value that would make sense for the area is pi. The radius is half the diameter, so 8 squared, which is 64 pi square inches. Okay. And if we want to get an approximation from this, we can use a calculator. So I'm going to multiply 64 times an approximation for pi, and 200.96. So 200.96 inches squared. Okay. So this is an example. The pizza itself may be exactly 200 square inches. It could be a little less, a little bit more. It could be 300 square inches. It could be a huge, large pizza. But I just wanted one example that made sense. So I used information based on my knowledge of pizza and made an approximation using a formula. Let's look at the next one. The temperature in degrees Fahrenheit in Arizona. So now we're thinking, or we want to think, is this one specific number, or can this be a changing value? Okay. And I claim it's a changing value, so I'm going to start here by listing things the change could depend on. So the change could depend on what time of year it is. That would affect the temperature. Where you are in Arizona. Okay, so it's typically colder in Flagstaff than it is in the Phoenix area. What time of day it is. So it's warmer during the day than the night. So I put a lot of different examples of what the temperature may depend on. We were just asked for one, and we're going to list 3 examples of values that may make sense. But first notice, since the temperature may depend on all of these things, they don't tell us what, but we can say that this is a changing value. And some values that may make sense, it's January right now, so I'm thinking it's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning. It's been about 73 degrees Fahrenheit in the afternoon. And then since we're in the Phoenix area and we're known for our hotness, let's say that in the summer it could be 119 degrees Fahrenheit. So these are some values of the variable that would make sense. Okay, I just picked 3. It could be a whole range of values. Okay. But we're just showing that this is a changing value, not a specific value represented by the variable. Let's look at the next ones. The cost in dollars of a gallon of gas. So this can depend on a few things. The first thing I can think of is what year is it? Okay, it also, so I'm thinking a few years back, gas was about $4.50 a gallon. Now it's about $2 a gallon, and it's been everywhere in between. Okay, so that's one way you can think of it. Also, it can depend on what gas station you go to. So a lot of different things, but we'll just put what year is it. So this is a changing value. It could depend on many different things, and since I chose what year is it, I'm going to put a few values. How about $4.59? I'm going to put per gal for per gallon, so make sure you put your units. Right now it's about, put $1.99 per gallon. And when I drove here from New York in 1999, when I was in Arkansas, it was 87 cents per gallon. I filled up a lot before I left. So those are some examples of reasonable costs of a gallon of gas and different things they could depend on. Let's look at the next one. The height in feet of the Washington Monument. Okay. So the Washington Monument, its height doesn't change. Okay, it's a fixed height. So that will be a placeholder. And I looked up online just to be accurate how tall the Washington Monument is and rounded to the nearest foot. It is 555 feet. Okay, so I think it's a little bit less than that, but if you round up to the nearest foot, that's how tall it is. So we could define a variable that represents the height in feet of the Washington Monument. And this would be the value for the variable. Whether we decide to use this number or not doesn't matter, because now we're in algebra, so we can just define it with a letter. Let's look at the next one. The high temperature in degrees Fahrenheit recorded at the temperature station at Sky Harbor on August 3rd, 2016. So you may notice this is very specific. Okay, so we're given a place where they're going to take the temperature, we're given a specific date, And we're also told that it's not just the temperature throughout the day, it's the high temperature, and there can only be one high temperature. So this is a placeholder. And I Googled this to give you accurate information, and it was a pretty nice day for August. The high temperature that day was 98 degrees Fahrenheit. And now let's look at the last one. The time in hours it takes for a person in class to complete their first homework assignment. So I'm assuming you could guess that different people in the class would take different amounts of time. Okay, so it depends. This could depend on the person in class. It may take them a different amount of time to complete the assignment. Okay, so this would be a changing value. And it could depend on other things as well. Everybody's experience with math, how long it's been since you've taken math. So this could depend on a lot of different things, but I'm just picking one. And let's say you should plan on spending, just for the homework assignment, I would say 1 to 2 hours. That's not including the media lesson and your tests and extra studying. So it could take 1.5 hours. We could say 2.17 hours. I wouldn't say 37 hours. That probably wouldn't be reasonable. But let's say maybe someone really works hard and reviews as they go, and they spend 4.23 hours. Okay. So now you should practice the U-Try problems in your packet immediately while this is fresh in your mind before you start the next video.